Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah,
And can everybody hear
Yes.
me?
Yes, 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 we can.
Yes, yes. Good.
thank you guys. So sorry about that.
Yeah. Technical difficulties.
Yes.
Well, today, as Steph and I have been starting from the beginning of the year, we went through the offer to purchase basic contract, and then we went through the listing contract. We're sort of starting the year with these basics. And so today we're going to go through buyer agency. And I'm zeroing in, instead of going through the buyer agency agreement or the previous slides that I had on a contract training, I'm going to zero in on what the responsibilities of a buyer agency are. A lot of people just seem to take buyer agency for granted, clients and agents. And I think it's wise every once in a while to dig deep and go through exactly what it means when you sign up a buyer to buyer agency. It should be a significant difference of how you work with that buyer as your client than how you work with that buyer who wants to stay a customer and doesn't want to be represented. So I think that we really need to review all the different things that you really need to do as a buyer's agent. And it is a lot deeper, a lot more responsible, and a lot more serious than when you're just showing somebody properties and you're not going to negotiate or work with them. So we have you all on mute at this point, but I want to make sure that you feel comfortable and free to stop me at any time and ask questions. So make sure you unmute yourself and either raise your hand or in chat, or put a question in chat, and Steph will sort of watch those. But I want to make sure that when we're going through this, these details, and that's what today's presentation is, the details of the responsibilities of buyer agency. So let's go. Why should you offer buyer agency? Again, I think it's sort of, why, of course I would, and not really understanding what you're going to offer. About no sooner than 10 years ago or more, we had to convince agents to use buyer agency, and we had to really teach clients or buyers what it meant to have buyer agency. It was a new topic for agents and buyers, and we had to do a lot of selling to talk about the benefits of working with an agent as a buyer's agent. Now, today, I think most buyers understand that they want to be represented, and whether they understand the agreement that well or not, they do have a better understanding that they want to be represented. So we don't have to convince them anymore to be clients, but you have to make sure you're holding up your end of the agreement. So we offer it because most buyers assume they're being represented anyway. They think, why should I sign this agreement? Of course you're my client. Excuse me. Of course you're my agent, and you are going to represent me. There's a freedom in using buyer agency because you can use all the skills and the training and MLS and everything that you have to give this buyer real information and help you negotiate with the information that you can get and give advice to. It builds a better business relationship. You're not just a convenience, you are actually a skilled representative. You maintain your natural relationships with family, friends, first-time buyers. These are categories that you absolutely probably must have buyer agency with them. It's very hard to be removed and just be a paper pusher for a family member or good friend, or especially first-time buyers. If you have listings, sellers now want to start looking for houses. Those too, because you have a fiduciary relationship with them in the listing part of it. Now you really should have a fiduciary or buyer agency agreement on the buying side. Past clients and a very special category, relocation buyers.
Joni, 1 second. Can you unmute yourself? I accidentally just muted you.
Is that better now? You can
Yep.
hear?
Thank you.
Okay. How long was I out?
We just talked about maintaining natural relationships with family and friends, and
Right. That was
so-
just soon then. Yeah.
Yep.
And I just wanted to stress the importance of, if you're working with relocation, you really must have buyer. In fact, most relocation companies demand that you work with them as a buyer's agent. But there are times when you're meeting with a customer who wants to buy something and you're getting some red flags. So there are times when you must talk about the choice of buyer agency, but you don't really want to encourage it, or you want to maybe postpone the relationship in the agency. You can tell in your working with a buyer if they're not going to be loyal, if they're always skipping off to open houses, or they're following any lead they see or for sale sign they see and calling up listing agents. They're going to be hard to work with and have that cooperation with. And I would not sign them up. I would work with them as a customer and let them fly all over the region, but they're going to waste your time. And if you do spend a lot of time on, they could just literally go to somebody else. So those are people you don't want to sign up, or maybe just sign up a very short term of buyer agency to see how they go. When you cannot follow up with the buyer's needs, sometimes there are buyers that are totally unreasonable, totally wanting to buy a house for $150,000 in a neighborhood that's selling at $350,000. And they always think they can get a deal, and they always try to lower the price. And if they're not listening to you, if they have sort of the attitude that they know more than you do, those are also some people that you may not want to sign up for buyer agency. Same thing with exaggerated expectations. Either they listen to you and use you as a resource of information and knowledge, which you are. If they don't appreciate that, or they don't understand that, then work with them as a customer. If you are not working with them as a client, make sure that they sign the disclosure to customer form. And when you write an offer for a customer, you must send that disclosure to customer form with the offer to the listing agent. And then you mark on the first 2 lines that you are representing the seller or the listing firm in lines 1 and 2. It's very important. So when do you introduce it? There's some confusion on that sometimes, but really at the first meeting, and I really stress buyer consultation. If you are wanting some help on setting up a buyer consultation package, there's one in Command. There's a lot of training for that. I'd be happy to talk about buyer consultation with you. But this is a time to talk about the choice that they have as either being a customer or a client with you. And you talk about the benefits of being a client, but you also say you can continue to just be a customer, and explain what that is. The idea, the major change in using buyer agency is your skill of negotiating. I think it's one of your valuable skills. The more you learn how to negotiate and become a skilled negotiator, it is a sense of development. It is something that you practice, you learn, and you show that you know how to stand ground and negotiate, but end up in a win-win situation. It's just like any agent, a sports agent, talent agent. They are the person that negotiates for the sports figure, for the star, the music person. Those people are not negotiating for themselves. They leave it up to their agents to do so. And that's what you are in real estate. But you can wait and decide, show them some properties, see how it goes. But when you get close to writing an offer, that's when you're really going to start negotiating. And that's when you sit down with your buyer and say, let's talk about this buyer agency agreement so that I can go in and negotiate for you. And that's when it is signed. But introduced, it should be the first meeting to talk about the choices of both. So this is a good part. This is right out of the buyer agency agreement. And I think it's a section in the buyer agency agreement that agents and buyers sort of go, yeah, and look over it and don't really pay attention to it. But it can come back to bite you if you don't really stress this paragraph in the buyer agency agreement. It's under the heading of cooperation in the agreement. And I think it's something that you really need to help negotiate your client with. Because Steph and I get calls of what happens if you don't. And that's generally the situation where the buyer, your client, has scooted off and has found a wonderful house that they absolutely love at an open house. And the listing agent said, oh, don't worry, I can write this offer for you. And your buyer is now hooked up in a procuring cause situation. You may not get paid. Your client may be vulnerable to paying you your commission. All of these things are happening when you don't really settle in on this paragraph in the buyer agency agreement about cooperation. So firmly explain, the client agrees to cooperate with the firm, and of course the buyer agency is with Keller Williams. You solely are not the person representing this buyer. Keller Williams is representing it and you. So when it talks about the firm, it means Keller Williams and you. Agrees to cooperate with the firm and its agent and to provide them with accurate copies of all relevant records, documents, and other materials in client's possession, which are required in the connection with the purchase. Anything that they have that is important to their selection, what they are looking for, what they're able to afford, what they can do. This is pre-approvals from lenders, all of these things. They must agree to cooperate with you and the firm to provide these documents. So you're going to be a partner with them and their lender and their attorney if they have one, and their accountant if they have one, but all that information they must cooperate and share with you. The client agrees to be reasonably available for showings of properties. Sometimes you get a buyer client that you work very hard in setting up showings, and you find properties that are just coming on the market or delayed, and time is of the essence, and they're busy. You know, oh, I can't make it. I can be available on Saturday. Well, it's not going to be here on Saturday. So you don't need to be arguing with this client. You set these rules down at the very beginning when you're going through this agreement and say, you know, this is the kind of market we're in. It's extremely competitive. It's extremely fast moving. And I have to make sure that you feel that you're available for showings of properties. I'm going to make myself as available as possible. And I hope that you can cooperate with me and get to these showings too. Just having that short conversation with them does put that message in their head. And it makes it harder for them to keep saying, giving you excuses and I'm busy and I don't go out anywhere that early in the morning and that kind of stuff. So have that conversation with your client and make sure that they can cooperate. This last one is extremely important, and this is where we get oh no calls from all of you agents. Clients shall promptly notify the firm in writing of the description of any property the client locates, and that includes for sale by owners or properties that are delayed or they have the sign coming soon and things like that. They should notify the firm, which is Keller Williams, meaning you, of any property that they see that they may be interested in. And they shall inform other firms, agents, sellers, property owners with whom the client comes in contact with. I was watching the game when I typed this. With whom the client comes in contact with, that the firm represents client as buyers and refer all such persons to the firm. That means that if they are talking to a neighbor or a listing agent or going to an open house, that they are promptly to notify you that they went through this open house, that they talked to a neighbor who may be selling their house, and they must notify you of all that information. And then they are to inform these neighbors, listing agents, sellers, that, by the way, I am working with so-and-so at Keller Williams. I have buyer agency agreement with so-and-so. Explain that to them, that it's very important to say those words when they go into an open house, when they're talking to friends and neighbors. By the way, I am working with so-and-so at Keller Williams. I'll notify them. Okay, because sometimes they're very tempted to take the short route and you're left out. So getting down to the responsibilities of working as a buyer's agent, we all know, and you learn when you're going through licensing courses, the duties owed to all parties, and then the duties owed to clients, the additional duties. But this is where I think a lot of agents kind of gloss over and don't really pay strong attention to what these duties are, because something that Steph and I are very concerned with, of course, are liabilities that you may be facing. And if you are not following through with these duties as outlined in the buyer agency agreement, you can be sued. And so can Keller Williams be sued if you are not fulfilling your agreement and following the duties that are owed to them. So all parties must see that they are getting the duties of getting the brokerage services fairly and honestly. They are exercise reasonable skill and care in providing brokerage services. If someone is a customer and you're kind of lax on what you're providing to them or providing services fairly and honestly, they are owed those duties, and they can make some complaints if they don't think that you're following through with them. You're to provide accurate information about market conditions. You have to do your homework. You have to go into MLS. You have to know what the market conditions are and keep up with it. Make sure they're current. Learn how to read the statistics in MLS so that you can interpret them to customers and clients. You must disclose if there are any material adverse facts that you see. You must disclose those in writing to customers and to clients. You must protect their confidentiality. Maybe the buyer is in the process of getting a divorce, or maybe the buyer is in the process of selling his business, or things like that. You want that to be confidential at this point, and you are bound to that confidentiality for both customers and clients. Wisconsin is one of the few states that has this provision that we protect the confidentiality of all buyers, sellers too, because this phrase is in the seller's listing contract. But we are to respect confidentiality for both clients, sellers, and buyers, and then all buyers with their customers. We have a duty to safeguard the trust funds. Make sure that you are specific and particular about what you do with the earnest money and the trust funds. Don't just leave it up to the buyer. Make sure the buyer has done it correctly, written the check correctly, and deposited it where it should go correctly. Present contracts in an objective and unbiased manner and disclose advantages and disadvantages of the proposal. That's the idea of objective and unbiased. And sometimes this is where agents.
Oh. We lost you, Joan.
Says that I'm not muted.
We can hear you now. I think your mic just got
Okay.
muffled.
Okay. So as you know, when you learned in pre-licensing and looking at the listing contract and looking at the buyer agency contract, these duties owed to all parties are in there. So Tammy asked, how are material adverse facts presented in writing? When we get to duties owed to just clients, that is material adverse facts, and to customers, material adverse facts. And you put them in writing, actually just, you know, as simply as you can. Write it in a document, you can write it in an email, but it has to be in writing. I don't believe, is there a form for this?
I think there is a formal form. Let me look for it after we finish this up
Okay.
in zip forms, and we'll look at it together.
You know, I think there is a formal form for it as a listing agent.
Yeah.
And probably it's the same form for a buyer's agent. But we'll find it for you and get it out to everybody. Okay, so the next slide is basically what we owe to a client. So now, once you've signed the buyer agency agreement, you must follow these additional duties. And I'm going to share a list of other duties that you must use when you are a buyer's agent. Again, this is a liability hole, and you have to be very careful. If in some situations where you and this buyer maybe have issues with one another, or things aren't going well, or the buyer just isn't being cooperative or whatever, and they can point out, well, here are the duties that I was owed and this agent did not provide them. And if they can provide evidence of that and make a complaint or make a lawsuit out of it, this is where the liabilities fall. So this is where you have to be careful that you are giving these duties that you promised you would. So provide information and advice on real estate matters that affect the transaction. If you're going to be a buyer's agent, you have to do your homework. You have to know what is behind all of the details that are necessary in purchasing a property, and you need to provide those pieces of information about the community or about the property, and any advice that you can give them, as long as it's not legal advice, that affects the transaction. You are to provide all material facts affecting the transaction, not just adverse material facts. And this is something that, again, agents either have forgotten that they owe this duty, but it's your duty as a buyer's agent to actually research the property. Maybe it means going to the municipality and looking at the files under this property. You are the detective and looking at all the things that you can find out about this property, taking those extra steps to do some research to find material facts about the property and not just adverse material facts. You can find adverse material facts when you're going through the property with your buyer, or the listing agent can find material adverse facts when going through the listing. if the buyer is, excuse me, if the seller is not ready to disclose those things, it is very important that the listing agent must disclose them. If the listing agent has not disclosed them, and you and your buyer are going through the property and you see something that seems to be a very material adverse fact, and you look in the condition report, it's not there, and you call the listing agent and they have no idea what you're talking about, you need to put in writing that material adverse fact and share it with your buyer. And probably a good idea to share it with the listing agent as well. Agents in the firm will fulfill obligations and lawful requests that are within the scope of the agency agreement. Your clients may ask you to do certain things, and you are to fulfill those requests as long as they're lawful. And what's hidden in this line is fair housing. And make sure that your buyer is not asking for or requesting things that really involve fair housing. If they do, say no. And that is not a topic that you will deal with or discuss, and it probably is a good point in time for you to terminate the buyer agency agreement. But make sure that you do fulfill these obligations and lawful requests because you owe them this. So it's a hard line sometimes to decide. This is when you can call staff or me or call the legal hotline and make sure that, is it on the right side of the lawful request or is it on the wrong side of the lawful request? Any questions on these duties so far? Okay, the next one is a duty that's owed to them. And this is, as I said, this is the trunk, this is the key to buyer agency agreement. This is what you're being paid for. This is your value, this is your worth. And that is your ability to negotiate. If you haven't learned how to negotiate with the listing agent, with your buyer, you are not fulfilling your duties that are owed. And as I said, negotiating is a skill that's developed. It's something that maybe you had a prior business where you did a lot of negotiating, you may be already very good at it. But you need to search out, find, read all kinds of information that you can find on the skills of negotiating, and especially negotiating for a win-win solution. That's how we do it in real estate, and that's how you need to learn how to do it. We provide training, I think either national training or local training on negotiations every once in a while, but you can also search out the YouTube, you can search out WRAA, you can search out National NAR, you can search out Keller Williams National, and look for as many sources as you can find on how to develop your skills in negotiating. And then the final thing, and this is something that is hard to discuss, but every once in a while, the agent starts talking about what their commission is going to be, or what their deal is going to be. If they get this, if they don't get this, they're not going to get paid. And if they're not going to get paid as much as they should, anytime those conversations come up, either with the client or within their own heads, they are putting their interests, their commission, their money in their pocket ahead of their client's interest. And it is a violation of the code of ethics. It is something that you can be, if documented and there's evidence to that, you can be sued. So please call us if you are unsure about certain things, but I bluntly will notify an agent, I'm sorry, but what you're asking me, you're more concerned about your interests, your money, than you are about your clients. And you better watch out. You better step back and realize that this is about the buyer and the seller. It's not about the agent or the other agent. Keep your focus in the right place. Okay. So this is a chart that a lot of you may already have. I had it in the last buyer agency review that I did. But these are a list of some responsibilities of being a buyer agent, and it shows the distinction of the services that you can provide or the duties that are owed as a buyer's agent, as opposed to what you can and cannot do if you are a sub-agent or if you're treating this buyer as a customer. So make sure that you can share this with a buyer when you're talking about the choice of what your duties are and what your responsibilities are and what the benefits to them are if they work with you as a client. And so we sort of narrowed down some of these duties. Obviously for both, you can arrange showings. Obviously for both, you can help them find a lender that they can get their financing in order, walk through their pre-approvals and things like that, fill out the offer to purchase with cooperation from a lender on what they are able to get in their interest rates and their monthly payments. So you are to assist with financing. If it's not your strength, make sure that you rely on the skills of the lender instead of your opinion. Provide property data. You can do that for both, but digging a little deeper, as I said, going to municipality or doing things beyond that is really only for the buyer's agent. But any property data that's out there, you can provide that to them. You can explain the forms and the agreements to both a client and a customer. You can monitor the closing, and I strongly suggest that you attend all closings.
I could see up. I got it in the basement. Like the stairs down, had a lights log talk with her. Like, look.
Somebody's not muted.
I just muted him.
Okay. So, as I said, I think it's very important that you attend your closing. That's how you get continued business and further referrals. If you don't show up on the most important day of their transaction, it's like you don't care. And you may have a very good reason, but I think you ought to change your plans. So go to your closings. For both a client and a customer, you can prepare a CMA, a comparative market analysis. You can show them what the property values are sold in MLS and everything. What you can't do is interpret it, advise them. You can prepare the study for them, but give it to them to read and understand. Now, providing access to the entire market listed, sale by owner, if in the agreement, write letters to owners who may be interested in the sale. You cannot do that for a customer. You can only do that for a client. And you must do it for a client. You are not able to escape researching everything that is on the market and making sure that if they're looking in a neighborhood that you can write letters on behalf of your client to see if anybody living in that neighborhood would be interested in selling. That's part of your duties as a buyer's agent, and you always have to go above and beyond. One thing that I've mentioned before, and I want to add in again, if you don't exclude for sale by owners or make a condition about for sale by owners in your buyer agency agreement, you are obligated to look at all, not just the MLS, but to look at all for sale by owner internet sites. Newspapers still have for sale by owner ads in them. That's going to be your responsibility. If you don't want to do that, and most agents don't, you can put a provision in your buyer agency agreement that all for sale by owners are excluded. Or you can go sort of in the middle and say only for sale by owners brought to the attention by the client are included. That means if you don't have to go research the entire for sale by owner market, but if your buyer sees one, sees a sign, hears about something, and they tell you about it, then you can work with them under your buyer agency agreement on that for sale by owner. And remember, for sale by owners, If they're not represented by an agent, maybe represented by a lawyer, but you're going to do a lot more work representing your client with this for sale by owner. So I would suggest to some of you, if you're going to work with a for sale by owner, you can ask for more of a success fee, more of a commission. Instead of 2.4, you can ask for 3% or 3.5% or add on a fee, whatever. But it is difficult to work with for sale by owners with a client. You must have buyer agency agreement. You must have buyer agency agreement to contact a for sale by owner. You see the sign or you see an ad and tell them that you have a possible buyer. If that buyer is a customer, there's no agency in that transaction, and that buyer and that seller can go waltzing off on a transaction by themselves. You have to have agency with the buyer in order to make that contact call to the for sale by owner. Must. You also can negotiate with the for sale by owner about what commission he will pay you, or maybe your client will pay you part of the commission if the seller is not going to cooperate. But promote and protect the buyer's best interest. Advise the buyer in terms of the offer. Make sure that you're always talking about consumer protection when you're talking with your buyer if you are a buyer's agent. You're talking about what is going to be in their best interest and advise them in the offer. All advice through the offer with notwithstanding legal advice. Again, negotiate the best price and terms for the buyer. Have strategies, have negotiating strategies on how you're going to work with it. That is a duty that you owe to your client when you have buyer agency. You can't just get away with, well, what do you want to offer? What's your best price? You have to help them prepare and then get in with the listing agent and negotiate with the listing agent on a successful win-win situation. If the property you feel is really overpriced, if you feel that it is maybe the foundation, things don't look very well built, any kind of reasons not to buy this house, you have an obligation to bring that up to the buyer and talk about it. And talk about the reasons that you feel. You can continue to research and negotiate to see if they are reasons that will bother the buyer or the seller, but it's something that is part of your responsibility as a buyer's agent. Explain the pros and cons of the appraisal contingency, right to cure, title issues, testing, financing contingencies, and the offer to purchase. If you have this client that's very important to you, you have to make sure that you educate your client. You have to talk to them about all these different important matters in a transaction that can blow up a transaction if they're not understanding it. Talk about what the inspection entails. Talk about what the appraisal means when it happens. All those things should be talked about in buyer consultation before an offer is written, before a house is found, and then repeated during the time of writing an offer. Let's see. And talk about, I just had a call the other day from an agent who is newer and was buying a duplex that had a tenant in it and security deposit, and wasn't sure whether there was a lease or not. And she had never heard about the addendum R. And we talked about that. So you do the research on what an addendum O is and what an addendum R is to clarify your offer to purchase. It will save you a lot of writing, and it'll save you a lot of what if problems that may arise. In the contract training YouTube library, we did a whole contract training just on addendum R and addendum O last year. So we'll probably repeat it again this year, but get to know what those addendums say and mean to your client. Addendum O is about occupancy. Addendum R is about rental properties. Check with the municipality on current news or issues with the property. This is a must, and a lot of surprises happen at the end of a transaction just before closing when some of these items are brought up. You have to be proactive, find out about these issues or problems that may be lodged there with the municipality before they even write an offer. Follow through on all terms and dates. Don't let a contingency automatically expire. That is certainly a very important responsibility you have, even with a customer, but with a client, it could mean a lawsuit. And then keep your keep your position, buyer's position confidential. Again, you're working with a client or a customer. These last two duties are for both. Does anybody have any questions about it? I think there's some things in chat.
Yeah, I was just gonna respond further to Tammy to your question on how a for sale by owner is addressed in the offer to or in the buyer agency agreement, and lines starts on line 13 to 15. But it states the firm's authority under this agreement extends to all property within the state of Wisconsin, except for those property excluded as excluded properties on the following line 17 through 20, and applies to any property under excluded property subject to a prior agreement. So as it states, it applies to all property unless you exclude that for sale by owner, and that's how it is addressed. It's not that for sale by owner, that term is specifically stated in the buyer agency agreement anywhere.
Yeah, so you can write it in on line 19 of the buyer agency agreement. And as I said, you can either exclude all for sale by owners, or you can only include for sale by owners brought to the attention by the client. And remember, don't ever call a for sale by owner seller unless you have buyer agency.
All right, I'm gonna stop the share so we can all go to any other
Are there
questions.
any- Mhm. Yeah, any questions? This is really an important distinction, I think, that all of you should learn, whether you are newly licensed or whether you've been in the business forever. Because a lot of people start to take things for granted and start to assume things. Don't ever assume in real estate. Make sure that you cover your bases and recognize that being a buyer's agent is a very, very important responsibility.
Okay, well, we're off next week because of family reunion. And I think there are going to be some just like live stream events around family reunion next week. So I'm sure they'll be announced in tomorrow's meeting. And then the following Monday, we'll go over the vacant land offer to purchase and go through that as best we can. So, okay.
If anybody is having more questions about buyer agency on a one-on-one basis, more than happy to sit down and go through verbiage, go through scripts on how you propose some of these situations in buyer agency. But again, we take it very seriously and it's very important.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you
guys.
all.
Cool. Thank you
Have a
so
great
much.
day.
Bye-bye.